in this particular case? We need a y-intercept and we need a slope. Okay, so how do we find the slope? We do our equation, right? So the easiest way for me to do this is probably to show. So here's my regular equation. What are my y's? 0 and 9, and my x's are then obviously the other one. But if you said 0 and 9, if you're going to do 0 minus 9, you have to do what? Negative 2 minus 4. Now, it doesn't matter which way you do it. If you want to do it 9 minus 0, you could have done this and switched them around, but then you would have had done 4 minus negative 2. So again, it doesn't matter which order you do. Either way, you're going to come up with the same thing of 3/2. So now, how do I find my b? Anybody remember how I do this? Well, to find my b, I'm going to do the math of picking one of the points. And again, if I have an option of picking points, and one of my points has a 0 in it, I'm going to use that point all the time. Why? Because when I put 0 into the equation, it cancels things out and it makes it a lot easier. Okay, so I'm going to put it into y equals mx plus b again. Or you can use the point slope form as they do here. It doesn't really matter. You're just looking for how do you find the y. All right? So in this case right here, if we put our point in and our slope, then we're just going to reduce. So you can use point slope form, or you can put it into y equals mx plus b and find your your b. So if you want to do it this way, you just use your point that you did, and again, I would go back and use the other point, because like I said, anytime that I have a point that involves 0, I'm going to use that. So this is just another option. If that option was easy for you, do it that way. If you like it this way, that's fine. We already found that our slope was 3/2. And I'm going to use this point just because of the 0. So y is 0 is equal to 3/2 times x, which is negative 2, plus b. So basically, I'm just solving for my b. And so if I take 3/2 times negative 2, I get what? Negative 6 over 2, or negative 3 plus b, right? And so what's my b? My b is 3. If you would have continued on the way they did it in this one, so again, all we're doing here is showing you two different options of finding the exact same thing. So then they would have just put in their information, their 4 and their 9. Remember, every time that I use this formula, point slope form, the variables that have the little subscripts are my point. The y and the x that don't have subscripts are just simply y and x. They're always going to be there. So either way, then I would distribute and solve. So if I distribute and solve, my answer ends up in y equals mx plus b. If I do this over here, I go through the process of finding my b, and then just take my information and put it back in. Y equals, what's my m? My m is 3/2. It always goes with x, and then plus my b. Notice, we got the exact same thing. So it's just two different ways of doing the same exact problem, and it's just however you want to do it. Okay? That makes sense to everybody, what we're trying to show there? All right. So again, some people think, one version is way easier than the other. I don't care how you do it. It's just how your melon works, basically. Okay? But again, you're going to come up and get the exact same answer no matter what, which is y equals 3/2, or 3/2 x plus 3. So then they don't particularly say that in this case, but if I was asked to graph this, how do I graph this equation? Start at 3, which means where? Up, right? So again, remember, every time that I'm going to graph, my first point always has to be on my yellow axis, the y one, up and down. And then how do I use my slope? Up 3 and over which way to? Right. And how many points do I need? At least 3 total, right? And then make sure that you get a ruler, lost them, and draw a straight line Remember, it needs to be a line, so we need to include what? Arrows at the end. So we get a ruler. We're drawing it on graph paper again, which I'm sure you all went and got instead of using all the line. Right. Okay? So again, they didn't necessarily say to graph it, but if along the line and somewhere, they'll probably tell you to graph it. So we have to have this method for the start of that equation. Questions with that one? Or that kind of problem? You need to see another one of that kind. Okay? And then in that case, we jump down to this one. So this one says write an equation of a line through 5, -2, and 0, -2 in slope-intercept form. Why I want to show you this one is because of one specific thing. Basically, if you don't recognize what I'm trying to show you here, you're going to do what we did in this last example. Again, for this problem. Now, why am I emphasizing this one right here? If I look at my 2 points, what do I notice about both of my points? They have the same y. If they have the same y, what's that tell you? It's a horizontal line. So if it's a horizontal line, what would my line be? X or y for my variable? Y. And what's my y? -2. So my answer should be just y equals -2. But if you, again, you don't recognize that, then you have to go through finding your slope. And when you stick your numbers in there, you're going to end up having 0 on top, so it's 0/5. And then hopefully you recognize that anytime that I have a horizontal line, my slope's going to be 0. If it's a vertical line, we figured out the other day, it was what? No slope, right? Okay, because 0 is on the bottom. So that's the only reason I wanted you to see that one. So take your time or take 2 seconds and look at your actual points. If the x's are the same, I have a vertical line. If the y's are the same, I have a horizontal line, and it eliminates a lot of work. Because now I just look at it and I just put my answer down. Questions with that one? So then we get into these kind of problems, and these are basically the same ones. Well, it's the same process in a sense, but the key word to this would be the perpendicular part, or if they said parallel to it. Okay, so what's that mean? If it's perpendicular, what's true about my line that I'm going to make slope? It's what? And the opposite reciprocal, right? And we like to say the opposite reciprocal because we want to change the sign. So in this particular case, the line that they give me is right here. What's my slope? 1/5, right? And so what is the perpendicular slope for the line that goes through 2, 0? -5, right? So I'm going to use that information. I'm going to use m equals 5, or what do we say, -5, right? My m equals -5. Now I have to write it in slope-intercept form. So I have my slope, but I have a point. So again, I'm going to use my point-slope form. Okay? It's just easier for me to do that here. So if we do the point-slope form, what is my equation that I'm going to use to solve this problem right here? I'm going to use y minus y sub 1 equals x times, or sorry, m times x minus x sub 1. Now what are my pieces that I know? What's my y sub 1 in my point that they gave me? What's my y? 0. So I have y minus 0, or I just have y. Again, any chance that I have to use a point that has 0 in it, it's really nice. We didn't really have a choice here, so they made it easy on us. And then my m is -5, and my x in this case is what? +2, so it ends up x minus 2. And then if I'm going to write it in slope-intercept form, all I have to do to this problem is what? Distribute. So we get y equals, if I distribute, what do I get? Let me help you, because I know it's hard math. Negative 5x plus 10. Okay? And again, it doesn't say anything about graphing it, but if I had to graph this, where would I go? Up 10, and then? Over 1, which way? Right. Remember, when I have my slope, and it's negative, that negative either goes to the top or the bottom, but not both. So when Hannah says down 5, then I'm going to go right 1. If I switch my negatives, I can always put the negative on the bottom if I want. Then I would have gone up 5 and left 1. But it's essentially the same thing. And then I just need 3 different points so I can draw a graph. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so again, the biggest thing that we wanted to show here is that you recognize the vocabulary, and every time that it says perpendicular, I automatically know, okay, I have to take my slope, flip it around, and change the sign. If it says parallel, I take that slope that's in the problem, and I just use it. So I would use 1/5 here with my point. Make sense? All right. You need to see any more, or another one of that kind? The last one I want you to see is just an equation, or sorry, kind of a story problem, because I know you all love story problems. So this one says a car rental company charges $25 per day plus $100 deposit. Everybody understand what that means? Yes. Okay. So, what does the $100 deposit mean?
100
Regardless, right? So, in my equations, what does the $100 really mean? What part of my equation would the $100 be? If I had a regular equation that sooner or later they were going to ask me to graph. So essentially, I'm going to think about this equation right here, y equals mx plus b. What part of y equals mx plus b would be my $100? The y-intercept, the b part, right? It's always going to happen. So when it says write an equation to represent the total cost of C for the D day's use, what is my D really? Yeah, and so my slope would actually be a 25, right? And I'm going to have 25x or 25D in this case, because I want to know how many days it's going to be that I rent my car, and I charge $25 every day, plus that $100 no matter what. So if I have it 1 day, or if I have it 6 days, I always have to pay that $100. So my equation would be which one here? D, right? Because this one we have our slope, and we've already established that the 100 should be the y-intercept, so that's the part that's all by itself. And if we watch the little thing fall, that's what we got. So the only thing I wanted to show you there is to make you think a little bit about what could act as a y-intercept. All right? Questions with anything? The biggest thing on this assignment is to read the question carefully and understand what you are given and what equation they want you to use. So again, my 2 equations that I have the option of using today are those 2, and then we might also need our slope formula again. So you might have to use this. And remember, it doesn't matter which y we use first. You could do y sub 1 or y sub 2. That doesn't ever matter. But what matters is that my subscripts always are the same. So we always wrote it yesterday as 2 minus 1, but we could write this as 1, and then the 2's on the bottom, for the second one. Okay. Questions with any of that stuff?